What does a billionaire do when a minimum wage worker hands him something and says, "I think you need this more than I do"? He stood completely still. Because in 40 years of business, nobody had ever said those words to him. Nobody. James Whitmore had built his first hotel at the age of 31 with a loan he was not entirely sure he could repay and a handshake from a man whose last name he no longer remembered. That hotel had 42 rooms, a broken elevator, and a night manager who smelled permanently of cigarettes. It lost money for 2 years. Then it didn't. Then it made a great deal of money. Then James built another one. 31 years later, Whitmore Holdings owned 19 hotels across 8 states, 4 of them in New York City alone. The company employed just over 4,000 people. Its annual revenue had last been reported, in a business magazine James had stopped reading because he found it embarrassing, at approximately $3.2 billion. James was 62 years old. He had a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, a house in Connecticut he visited twice a year, and an assistant named Patricia who managed his calendar with the efficiency of a military operation. He had been married once, briefly, in his late 30s. He had 2 adult children who called him on his birthday and at Christmas and seemed, on the whole, to be doing fine without him. He had also, in the past decade, become quietly and increasingly certain that something was wrong with his company. Not with the numbers. The numbers were fine. Not with the properties. The properties were immaculate. What was wrong was something harder to measure, a quality of interaction, a texture of service, something that existed in the space between a guest and an employee in the first 30 seconds of contact. He had noticed it first in guest reviews, which he still read personally every Sunday morning with his coffee. Words kept appearing. Words like transactional and impersonal and felt like nobody actually cared. He had mentioned this to his board. The board had suggested a customer experience consultant. James had hired the consultant. The consultant had produced a 47-page report and a set of laminated service guidelines that were now displayed in the break rooms of all 19 hotels. The reviews had not changed. So on a Tuesday morning in late October, James Whitmore did something he had not done in 11 years. He got dressed in clothes that did not belong to him, a gray sweatshirt purchased from a thrift store on Amsterdam Avenue, a pair of faded jeans, worn brown boots with a small hole near the left toe, and a dirty white wool beanie pulled down to his ears. He put an old black backpack on his shoulders. He removed his watch, the thin gold one Patricia had given him for his 60th birthday. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. He did not recognize himself. Which was, he supposed, exactly the point. He took a cab to the Avalon Grand Hotel on 54th Street and walked through the front door. The lobby of the Avalon Grand was, by any reasonable standard, extraordinary. The ceiling rose 40 feet above a floor of pale Carrara marble. A chandelier the size of a small car hung at its center, casting light that scattered across the walls in patterns that changed with the angle of the afternoon sun. There were fresh flowers everywhere, white orchids in tall glass vases, changed daily at a cost that James had once noted in a quarterly report without emotion. The air smelled of cedar and something faintly citrus. Soft piano music played from speakers concealed somewhere in the walls. James had stood in this lobby hundreds of times. He had stood here in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had stood here while managers rushed toward him and staff straightened their postures and everyone within 20 feet became slightly more alert. Today, nobody looked at him. He stood just inside the revolving door for a full 45 seconds. 2 guests with rolling suitcases moved around him without acknowledgement. A bellman walked past with a luggage cart and did not make eye contact. A woman at the concierge desk glanced up, assessed him in approximately 1 second, and looked back down at her screen. James walked slowly to a seating area near the far wall, 3 low leather chairs arranged around a glass coffee table, and sat down. He put his backpack on the floor between his feet. He looked at his hands. He had no plan beyond observation. He wanted to see what happened when no one knew who he was. He wanted to see the hotel as a guest who did not matter. What he saw, in the first hour, was competent. Staff moved efficiently. Requests were handled. The check-in line moved at a reasonable pace. But he noticed things. A front desk employee who answered a guest's question while simultaneously typing, never fully making eye contact. A doorman who held the door but said nothing, his gaze somewhere above the guests' heads. A manager who crossed the lobby twice, both times looking at his phone. Professional. Smooth. And almost entirely empty of actual human warmth. James sat and watched and felt something he had not expected to feel. He felt sad. It was at 2:20 in the afternoon that Adam Yusuf turned the corner from the service corridor into the main lobby. He was pushing a cleaning cart, a standard-issue housekeeping trolley with blue and white towels stacked on one side and cleaning supplies on the other. He wore the hotel staff uniform, white shirt, black trousers, a navy vest with the word staff embroidered in gold on the left chest. He wore yellow cleaning gloves. He moved with the particular unhurried efficiency of someone who has done a job long enough to know exactly how much energy it requires and wastes none of it. He was 28 years old. He had been in New York for 4 years, having come from Lagos with a student visa, a suitcase, and an acceptance letter from a community college in the Bronx where he was studying business administration 2 evenings a week. He had worked at the Avalon Grand for 2.5 of those 4 years. He was, by the assessment of his floor supervisor, the most reliable employee on the housekeeping team. He had also, in those 2.5 years, never been noticed by anyone above the level of floor supervisor. Adam pushed his cart past the seating area where James was sitting. He did not look at James the way the other staff had not looked at James, that professional non-look, the cultivated blindness of people trained to see only what requires a response. Adam looked at James the way a person looks at another person. Directly. Briefly. And with what James would later describe, in a conversation he replayed many times, as genuine attention. Adam continued past. James watched him begin work on the far side of the lobby, polishing the brass fixtures near the elevator bank, moving with quiet focus. 12 minutes later, Adam came back. He stopped his cart beside the seating area. He reached into the lower shelf of the trolley and produced a small paper bag, the kind the hotel used for complimentary snacks left in guest rooms. He walked to where James was sitting and stood before him. "Excuse me, sir," he said. His voice was quiet and even. He had a slight Nigerian accent, the consonants precise and deliberate. "I noticed you've been sitting here for a while. I don't want to intrude. But I thought," he paused. He held out the paper bag. "I think you need this more than I do." James looked at the bag. Inside were 2 shortbread cookies wrapped in cellophane and a small bottle of water, the kind Adam would have been entitled to take from the housekeeping supply for his own break. James Whitmore, who had not been genuinely surprised by anything in a very long time, sat completely still. "I'm fine," he said finally, because it was the only thing he could think to say. Adam nodded, slowly. He did not withdraw the bag. "I know," he said. "But please take it anyway." He set the bag gently on the coffee table in front of James. Then he looked at him, not with pity, not with the performance of kindness, but with something simpler and rarer than either of those things. He looked at him as if James mattered. As if James, in his worn boots and dirty beanie, sitting alone in the corner of a lobby that belonged, in the most literal possible sense, to James himself, as if this man was worth a moment of genuine human attention. "Have a good afternoon, sir," Adam said. He returned to his cart and continued working. James picked up the small bottle of water. He held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time that he sat in that lobby for another hour and a half. He watched Adam work. He watched him greet a lost-looking elderly couple and spend 6 minutes walking them to the correct elevator bank when he could have simply pointed. He watched him pick up a child's dropped toy from the marble floor and return it to the mother with a small bow that made the child laugh. He watched him stop what he was doing entirely when a guest asked him a question, not answer while moving, not answer while looking elsewhere, but stop, turn, and give the question his full attention. James had employed 4,000 people. In 31 years of business, he had interviewed hundreds of them, promoted dozens of them, and occasionally had to let them go. He had developed, over those decades, what he privately considered a reasonable ability to assess character quickly. What he was watching now was not performance. It was not the behavior of someone who suspected they were being observed. It was simply what Adam Yusuf did, how he moved through the world, how he treated people, what he considered worth his attention. At 4:15, James stood up. He put the empty water bottle and the cookie wrapper in his backpack. He picked up the paper bag that Adam had given him and folded it carefully and put that in his backpack too. Then he walked to the service corridor where Adam had disappeared with his cart. He found him restocking supplies at the end of the hallway. "Excuse me," James said. Adam turned. There was no flash of recognition. Of course there wasn't. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" "The bag you gave me earlier," James said. "The water and the cookies. Why did you do that?" Adam considered this for a moment. Not as if the question was difficult, as if he wanted to answer it properly. "Because you looked like you could use something," he said simply. "And I had something I could give." That seemed like enough of a reason. "You didn't think about whether it was your place to do that?" James asked. "Whether your manager would approve?" Adam tilted his head slightly. "If I only do good things when my manager is watching," he said, "then I'm not really a good person. I'm just a careful employee." He paused. "My faith teaches me that Allah sees what no one else sees. So it doesn't matter if anyone is watching or not. I try to behave the same either way." James looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" he asked. "Adam," he said. "Adam Yusuf." "Thank you, Adam," James said. He walked back through the lobby, through the revolving door, and out onto 54th Street. He stood on the pavement in his thrift store sweatshirt and his boots with the hole in the left toe, and he breathed the cold October air, and he thought about what Adam had just said. "If I only do good things when my manager is watching, then I'm not really a good person. I'm just a careful employee." He had spent 31 years building a company. He had written mission statements and values documents and service standards. He had hired consultants and conducted training programs and produced laminated guidelines for break rooms. And in 6 minutes, a 28-year-old man on minimum wage had said something that made all of it feel insufficient. 3 days later, Adam Yusuf was called to the general manager's office. He had spent those 3 days in the ordinary rhythm of his work: corridors, supply carts, elevator banks, the quiet of early mornings before the guests woke up. He had prayed far before each shift. He had studied for his business administration exam on the subway. He had called his mother in Lagos on Wednesday evening and told her he was fine, which was true. He had not thought again about the man in the lobby. He had given dozens of small kindnesses to dozens of people in those 2.5 years. He did not keep a record. That was not the point. When he entered the general manager's office, there were 2 people inside. The general manager, whose name was Mr. Collins, sat behind his desk with an expression Adam could not immediately read. And in one of the chairs in front of the desk sat a man Adam had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, in a gray 3-piece suit that fit him with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident. A thin gold watch on his left wrist. Silver white hair combed back from a face with deep lines and a scar above the right eyebrow. Adam looked at the man's eyes. He recognized them immediately. "Hello, Adam," said James Whitmore. Adam was quiet for a moment. He processed what he was seeing with the same careful attention he gave to everything. "The man in the lobby," he said. "Yes," said James. Adam nodded slowly. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look alarmed. He looked the way he always looked, present, attentive, and entirely himself. "How can I help you, sir?" he said. James almost smiled. "Sit down, please," he said. Adam sat. James told him who he was, the owner of the company, the hotel, the chair Adam was sitting on. He told him about the undercover visit, about the reviews, about the consultants and the laminated guidelines. He told him what he had watched Adam do for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. And he told him what Adam had said in the service corridor, which James had written down on a piece of paper that evening and had read several times since. Adam listened to all of this without interrupting. When James finished, Adam said, "I'm sorry if I caused any concern by approaching you. I wasn't sure it was appropriate. But you looked cold." "You did nothing wrong," James said. "You did everything right. That is precisely the problem." He paused. "I have 4,000 employees. I have service guidelines and training programs and performance reviews. And I am sitting here telling you that in 2 hours of watching my own hotel, you were the only person I saw behave the way I always imagined my company would behave. That concerns me deeply." Adam was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Please," said James. "The guidelines and the training programs, do they tell people why they should be kind? Or just how?" James looked at him. "How," he said, after a moment. "They tell people how." Adam nodded. "That might be the problem," he said quietly. "You can teach someone to smile. You can teach someone to make eye contact. But you cannot teach someone to actually care. That has to come from somewhere inside them. From what they believe. From what they think the point of a human life is." He paused. "For me, it comes from my faith. I believe every person I meet is a creation of Allah and deserves to be treated as such. That is not a guideline. That is just what I believe." The room was quiet. Mr. Collins, who had been sitting behind his desk with the careful stillness of someone trying not to exist, looked at his hands. James Whitmore looked at Adam Yusuf for a long moment. Then he said, "I would like to offer you a position." Adam Yusuf did not become the general manager overnight. That is not how these things work, and Adam would have been the first to say so. What James offered him, and what Adam accepted after a week of careful thought and a long phone call with his mother in Lagos, was a place in an 18-month internal management training program, a program that had previously been available only to employees with college degrees and at least 5 years of service. Adam had neither. James made an exception. He wrote a memo to his board explaining the exception, which was 2 paragraphs long and cited no business metrics. It cited a conversation in a service corridor and a small bottle of water. The board approved it unanimously. During those 18 months, Adam continued to study business administration 2 evenings a week. He continued to pray 5 times a day. He continued to call his mother on Wednesday evenings. He continued to notice the people around him, not as categories or problems to be managed, but as people. James Whitmore visited the Avalon Grand 4 more times in the following year. Each time, he came as himself. Each time, he walked through the lobby and looked at what had changed. Something had. It was not dramatic. It did not appear in a single guest review or a quarterly metric. It was the same quality he had been unable to name for years, that texture of service, that space between a guest and an employee in the first 30 seconds of contact. It was warmer. Slightly but genuinely warmer. He mentioned this to his board. The board asked what had changed. James said he had hired someone who understood that you cannot teach people to care, you can only find people who already do, and then get out of their way. The board did not fully understand this. James did not mind. James Whitmore still has the folded paper bag in his desk drawer. It is a small thing, The kind of bag that costs the hotel approximately 4 cents to produce, used thousands of times a year for complimentary cookies left on guest pillows. It has the hotel's logo on one side. It is slightly crumpled from being carried in a backpack across 54th Street on a cold Tuesday in October. He has been asked about it, once, by Patricia, who noticed it in his drawer while looking for a stapler. "What's that?" she asked. "A reminder," James said. "Of what?" He thought about this for a moment. "That the most important things that happen in a business," he said, "usually happen when nobody important is watching. And that the person you least expect is often the one who shows you what you were missing." Patricia looked at him for a moment, decided this was not a conversation she had been hired to have, and found the stapler. James closed the drawer. He thought about Adam, about a 28-year-old man pushing a cleaning cart through a hotel lobby, stopping for no reason anyone could measure, handing a bottle of water to a stranger because he believed that every person he met was a creation of God and deserved to be treated as such. He thought about what it would mean to build a company on that principle. Not on guidelines. Not on metrics. On the simple, radical idea that every person who walks through a door is worth genuine human attention. It would take a long time. He knew that. He was 62 years old and he did not have infinite time. But he thought he would try. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet goodness changed something in your life, share this with them today. The world does not run on the people who are watched. It runs on the people who behave the same whether anyone is watching or not.